Have you ever noticed something painful, something almost unbearable? The people who are supposed to love you the most are sometimes the ones who reject you the hardest. Not strangers, not critics, family. And when that rejection comes from family, it doesn't just sting, it shakes the ground beneath your identity. Because family is supposed to be the place where you belong without explanation. It's supposed to be the place where you don't have to earn love, where you don't have to prove your worth, where you can fail, fall apart, and still be held with compassion. But sometimes that's not what happens. Sometimes the very people who raised you, grew up with you, or share your blood begin to pull away the moment you change, the moment you grow, the moment you stop playing the role they assigned to you. And that kind of rejection creates a very specific kind of pain. It makes you ask questions that cut deep into the soul. What did I do wrong? Why am I not enough for them? Why does being myself cost me my family? But here's the truth most people never say out loud. Family rejection is rarely about your worth. It's about the discomfort your authenticity creates inside systems that were built around your silence. Families, like all human systems, develop patterns, roles, expectations, invisible agreements about who everyone is supposed to be. And when one person begins to step outside that script, the system reacts. Not with understanding, with resistance. And if you've ever been rejected, criticized, or emotionally pushed away by family simply because you started becoming your true self, what you're experiencing is not failure. It's the painful friction of growth colliding with fear. And understanding that changes everything. One of the most painful truths about family betrayal is this: sometimes the moment you begin to grow is the moment the people closest to you begin to pull away, and it feels confusing because growth is supposed to be a good thing. Healing is supposed to be celebrated. Becoming stronger, wiser, and more self-aware should make the people who love you proud. But that's not always what happens. Instead, something strange begins to unfold. The more you change, the more uncomfortable certain family members become. The more boundaries you create, the more they accuse you of being selfish. The more honest you become, the more they say you've changed. And the truth is, you have changed. But what they're really reacting to isn't your growth. They're reacting to the disruption your growth creates inside a system that depended on you staying the same. Every family develops unspoken roles. Someone becomes the peacemaker, someone becomes the caretaker. Someone becomes the one who absorbs the tension. Someone becomes the problem child, and these roles quietly keep the emotional balance of the family intact. But the moment you stop playing your role, the system shakes. If you were the one who always kept the peace, suddenly speaking the truth feels threatening to everyone else. If you were the one who always tolerated disrespect, setting boundaries now feels like betrayal to them. Because when you step out of the role they assigned to you, it forces everyone else to confront something uncomfortable, their own behavior. And most people would rather protect the familiar story of the family than face the truth that the system itself may have been unhealthy. So instead of celebrating your courage, they resist it, not because your growth is wrong, but because it reveals what others are not yet ready to face. Here is the part that hurts the most. The rejection often begins the moment you stop abandoning yourself to keep the peace. For years, maybe even decades, you might have been the one who tolerated things quietly, the one who stayed silent when something felt unfair, the one who smoothed over conflicts, made excuses for hurtful behavior, and convinced yourself that this is just how family is. You carried the emotional weight because you believed love meant endurance. But then something changed. Maybe you started healing. Maybe you started learning about boundaries. Maybe you simply reached a moment where the pain of staying silent became greater than the fear of speaking up. And the moment you began to say things like, "that hurt me," or "I won't accept that anymore," the reaction was immediate. Suddenly you were labeled as difficult, sensitive, ungrateful, dramatic, and that reaction can make you question your own reality. You start wondering if maybe they're right. Maybe you are overreacting. Maybe you should just go back to the way things were. But here's the truth that many people struggle to accept when a system benefits from your silence. Your voice will always sound like rebellion. What you're experiencing isn't simply disagreement. It's the discomfort of a family dynamic being challenged. Because when you stop shrinking yourself to make others comfortable, it exposes the imbalance that was always there. And that exposure can feel threatening to people who are deeply invested in keeping things exactly the way they've always been. So they push back. They dismiss your feelings. They question your intentions. Sometimes they even rewrite history to make you look like the problem. And in that moment, the deepest wound appears. Not just the pain of conflict, but the heartbreak of realizing the people you hoped would understand you the most are struggling to accept the person you're becoming. There's another layer to family rejection that people rarely talk about, and it's this: sometimes your healing exposes wounds that others have spent their entire lives trying to ignore. Families carry stories. Not just the happy ones we tell at gatherings, but the painful ones buried beneath years of silence, unspoken resentments, old betrayals, generational trauma that was never acknowledged, never processed, never healed. And many families survive by pretending those things don't exist. They survive by maintaining a quiet agreement. We don't talk about that. But when one person in the family begins doing deep emotional work, when you start asking honest questions, setting boundaries, and naming painful truths, you unintentionally shine a light on things others have tried very hard to keep hidden. And that light can feel terrifying, because acknowledging those truths would require accountability. It would require people to face the ways they may have hurt others. It would require them to confront their own unresolved pain. And for many people, denial feels safer than awareness. So instead of leaning into the conversation, they push the person holding the mirror away. They say things like, "Why are you bringing up the past? Just let it go." You're creating drama where there isn't any. But what they're really saying is something deeper. They're saying your courage to face the truth is making me uncomfortable. And here's the painful irony. The person who begins the healing process often becomes the one blamed for disrupting the family. You become the difficult one, the overly emotional one, the one who changed. But the reality is far more complicated. You didn't break the family. You simply stopped pretending that the cracks weren't there. One of the most confusing parts of family betrayal is that it often comes wrapped in language that sounds like love. You hear phrases like, "We're just worried about you," or "We only want what's best for you," or the one that cuts the deepest, "You've forgotten where you came from." And when those words come from people you love, they can create an overwhelming storm of guilt inside you. You start wondering if choosing your own path means you've somehow become selfish. You start questioning whether protecting your peace is actually hurting the people who raised you. But here's something important to understand. Sometimes what families call love is actually control dressed up in familiar language, not always intentionally, not always maliciously, but deeply rooted in fear. Because when you begin living differently than the expectations placed on you, it disrupts the identity your family built around you. Maybe you were supposed to follow a certain career. Maybe you were expected to stay quiet and agreeable. Maybe you were meant to prioritize family loyalty over your own emotional well-being. And the moment you step outside that expectation, it feels threatening to the story they've always told about you. So they try to pull you back. Sometimes with guilt, sometimes with criticism, sometimes with emotional distance. Not necessarily because they want to hurt you, but because the version of you they're comfortable with is the one that fits inside their narrative. But growth requires something incredibly difficult. It requires you to choose authenticity even when it disappoints the people you hoped would understand you. And that's where the real heartbreak of family rejection begins, because you're no longer choosing between right and wrong. You're choosing between being accepted and being true to yourself. There's a moment that many people experience after family rejection that feels almost unbearable. It's the moment when you realize that love does not automatically guarantee understanding, and that realization can break your heart. Because somewhere deep inside, most of us carry a quiet belief, if the people who raised me truly love me, they will eventually see me. They will understand why I changed. They will recognize that I'm not trying to hurt them, I'm trying to heal. But sometimes that moment never comes. Sometimes the apology never arrives. The conversation never happens. The recognition you hoped for stays painfully out of reach. And that absence creates a grief that is very hard to explain. It's the grief of loving people who cannot meet you where you are. The grief of wanting connection with people who only accept the version of you that no longer exists. And when that happens, the mind begins to spiral. You replay old conversations. You question your decisions. You wonder if you should shrink again just to restore the relationship, because belonging is one of the most powerful human needs we have. Our nervous system is wired for it. From childhood, our survival depended on being accepted by the people around us. So when family pulls away, it can feel like a threat to your very identity. But here is a truth that takes tremendous courage to accept. Belonging should never require you to abandon yourself. Real belonging is not about fitting into expectations. It's about being accepted in your truth. And when a family system cannot tolerate your truth, the painful reality is this: what you're losing is not love itself. What you're losing is conditional acceptance. One of the deepest wounds family betrayal creates is the feeling of isolation, not just physical distance, but emotional exile. You may still see them at gatherings. You may still hear their voices on the phone. But something has shifted. Something unspoken sits in the room like a quiet storm. You can feel it in the tension when you speak your mind. You can see it in the subtle looks, the awkward silences, the conversations that suddenly stop when you walk in. And slowly, painfully, you begin to realize the role you once played in the family is no longer available to you. You're no longer the person who absorbs everyone's emotions. You're no longer the one who sacrifices your boundaries to keep things comfortable. You're no longer willing to pretend that everything is fine when it isn't. And because of that, the dynamic changes. But here's the part many people misunderstand. When a family system begins to push someone out emotionally, it's often because that person has stopped participating in unhealthy patterns. You stopped enabling. You stopped apologizing for things that weren't your fault. You stopped shrinking your truth to protect someone else's ego. And the moment that happens, the system searches for a way to restore its old balance. Sometimes that means labeling you as the problem. It's easier for a family to believe that one person has changed for the worse than to acknowledge that the old dynamic was harmful. So they create a story. They say you're distant. They say you're cold. They say you think you're better than everyone else. But the reality is far more honest. You didn't become distant. You simply stopped betraying yourself in order to stay close. At some point in this journey, you begin to face one of the hardest emotional questions a person can ask. If I stop chasing their approval, who am I without it? For most of our lives, family approval quietly shapes our identity. The way we speak, the choices we make, the dreams we pursue, so much of it is influenced by the desire to be accepted by the people who raised us. And when that approval disappears, it can feel like the ground beneath your feet has vanished. Suddenly you're standing alone with your truth. No applause. No reassurance. Just the quiet weight of your own decisions. And in those moments, self-doubt can creep in like a shadow. You wonder if choosing yourself was worth the cost. You wonder if life would have been easier if you had simply stayed quiet, stayed agreeable, stayed inside the expectations they built for you. Because belonging to a group, even an unhealthy one, can sometimes feel safer than standing alone. But here's the deeper transformation that begins to happen when you stay committed to your truth. You start discovering a different kind of strength, a strength that isn't built on approval, but on self-respect. A strength that isn't dependent on others understanding you, but on your willingness to understand yourself. And slowly, something powerful begins to grow. You realize that your identity was never meant to be controlled by someone else's comfort. Your voice was never meant to be silenced for the sake of keeping the peace. And the more you honor that truth, the more you begin to see something clearly. Rejection does not define your worth. Sometimes it simply reveals who is not capable of meeting you at the depth where your truth lies. Here's a truth that is hard, but necessary family rejection does not mean you are unlovable. It does not mean you are broken. It does not mean you failed. What it often means is that you are becoming more visible than the system or the people in it can handle. You are shining a light on truths they have long avoided. You are refusing to stay small to make others feel safe. And that refusal, that courage, it can feel like betrayal to them. It's a cruel irony. The very act of protecting your soul, of honoring your emotional needs, can trigger fear, anger, and resistance in the people who are supposed to cherish you. And yet, this is where true resilience is born. When your heart is broken by those you love, you are given a choice to shrink back into old patterns for comfort or to stand fully in your authenticity, even if it means standing alone. The people who cannot meet you in your truth will drift away, yes. And that's painful. But the space they leave behind is sacred. It's the space where you begin to build the kind of relationships that are aligned with your growth, your honesty, and your emotional safety. Rejection from family is often a signal, not a verdict. A signal that the life you are stepping into requires courage, self-respect, and unwavering commitment to your truth. And the most beautiful part, when you stop seeking validation from those who cannot give it, you start discovering a deeper sense of belonging, one that comes from within, not from outside. It is painful. It is messy. But it is also liberating. So here's the final truth I want you to carry with you, family. Betrayal, painful as it is, does not define your worth. It does not determine your capacity to love, to grow, or to belong. The rejection you feel is a reflection of others' limitations, not your failure. What you are experiencing is not the end of connection. It is the clearing of space for authenticity. It is the painful but necessary pruning that allows you to grow into your full self, unburdened by the expectations and judgments that never truly served you. And here's the hardest, most beautiful lesson of all: the people who leave because they cannot meet you in your truth are making room for the people who will. The people who see you, honor you, and love you not for the role you play, but for the courage it took to claim your own life. Family betrayal hurts the most because we long for unconditional love. But what you are learning now is that unconditional love begins with yourself. It begins with speaking your truth, setting your boundaries, and holding your heart with tenderness even when others cannot. You will grieve. You will feel lonely. You will question yourself. And in that sacred space of discomfort, you will discover something extraordinary: your resilience, your power, and your capacity for love that is unshakable. So let this be your reminder: being rejected by family is not your fault. Standing in your truth is not selfish. Choosing yourself is not betrayal. And the life that awaits you, authentic, liberated, and profoundly yours, is worth every ounce of pain it took to get there. Your story is not diminished by their inability to see you. It is amplified by the courage it took to stand tall, even when they couldn't stand with you. You are enough. You always were. And now, finally, you are free.